Elsewhere, photos of Sang family members filled a screen. Analysts dismissed some as harmless, praised Donggi's growing influence, and criticized Soyun's greed. Then Dijun's photo appeared. The room grew tense as they realized the chairman's second-generation grandson had both access and money. They uncovered his fortune, his ties to fantasy investment, and his unusual privilege of private meetings with the chairman. Even the vice chairman didn't have that access. The room fell silent. Back at a cafe, Dijun asked Kim if he was sure they were being followed. Kim confirmed it. Dijun handed him a thick envelope, telling him to use it when needed. Kim stared, shocked. Dijun said money was a tool, nothing more. If Kim wanted to become someone important, he had to choose his own path first. Kim slipped the money away and followed him without a word. Later, a secretary entered and said they had a guest. Dijun looked up calmly. It was the chairman of Dihan Group. San and the hero exchanged surprised looks. The secretary froze in confusion. San calmly asked her to request a short wait. Dijun said he'd be in the conference room next door and asked to turn on the intercom. San slipped on his jacket, muttering that it wouldn't be good if he was seen since he'd just been on TV. Dijun pulled up his hood and smiled. San smiled back. The chairman stepped inside. The hero walked past him in silence. The chairman turned and watched him leave. San bowed and offered a handshake. The chairman smiled, thanking him for welcoming such an unexpected guest and hoping he wasn't disturbing him. San shook his hand warmly and said there was nowhere in Korea he'd be treated like an intruder. He gestured to the sofa and invited him to sit. The chairman removed his hat and asked how an investment company could seriously aim for Ain Motors. San answered modestly, but the chairman cut him off, saying there was no need for false humility since they were equals now. San asked if rumors really spread that fast. The chairman frowned, realizing that even if the rumor were true, San wasn't even trying to hide it. He dismissed the guard and closed the door. The chairman said since San was being open, he would be honest too. He asked what San wanted. San smiled and said he wanted Ain Motors. The chairman raised an eyebrow and asked if an investment firm shouldn't just invest and exit. He told San to name a price to avoid a pointless fight. San frowned and asked if he was really being offered money to withdraw. The chairman nodded, saying price wars without reason were exhausting. San shook his head and said he was misunderstood. Their investors had plenty of money and wanted some fun. He added casually that they were car enthusiasts, so manufacturers interested them. The chairman's veins bulged. Buying a company for fun stunned him. He realized negotiation was pointless. He warned that one article about foreign capital draining national wealth would be enough to crush San. San smiled and replied that once the auction price was revealed, Koreans would decide who was more patriotic. The chairman stared speechless. His phone rang. He ignored it and demanded to know what San wanted. He proposed using public funds to cover all gaps and competing purely on acquisition price. No politics, no pressure. San smiled and said in that case, whoever won would suffer minimal damage. The chairman asked if they were truly suggesting unified debt terms and competition only on price. San confirmed it calmly. Silence filled the room. San raised his hand and said since the chairman proposed simplifying things first, he'd accept the rules. Wrestling only became a sport once rules existed. The chairman stood, calling San amusing. He said it had been a long time since he took a confrontation seriously. Pressing his hat to his chest, he said Dihan Group was built through brutal fights, not easy ones. The door slammed. San collapsed into the chair. Dijun entered. San rubbed his neck and asked if the conditions would be accepted. Dijun smiled and said most likely. Elsewhere, Dihan Group executives gathered. Numbers flew across the table. Ain Motors' debt stood at over 3 trillion won. Subsidiary write-offs exceeded 1.5 trillion. Additional concessions pushed total relief past 7 trillion. The chairman frowned. Not accepting fantasy terms means starting over. Someone asked if fantasy really had that much money. No one knew, only that American capital backed them. Then one subordinate mentioned Hollywood. Based on intelligence from Magi Corporation, fantasy had invested in nearly every major successful film. None had failed. The room went silent. The chairman closed his eyes. Someone reminded him that refusing an outstretched hand often led to bleeding. At Yang Chao's house, he sipped tea and asked if Kibao truly came in person. Di Jun confirmed it and explained the compensation offer. Yang Chao laughed, saying Kibao must be desperate to move first. He asked what Di Jun suggested. Di Jun said he proposed competing only on acquisition price, while keeping government benefits intact. Yang Chao asked what Kibao said. Di Jun quoted him saying he'd take the confrontation seriously. Yang Chao laughed and said the man must have skipped his medicine. He asked what Kibao would do next. Di Jun answered that Yang Chao himself would accept. Fixed variables were safer than new ones. Yang Chao smiled. A businessman's greatest fear was uncertainty. He said Di Jun had played all his cards, but Kibao hadn't. Now it was time for a wider attack. Media, creditors, government agencies, even the assembly would apply pressure. Di Jun asked if Yang Chao could help further. Yang Chao said no. Even helping more would hurt everyone. He explained he'd already stopped Chairman Sun Ai's arrest, and that alone raised suspicion. Di Jun realized government pressure had limits. Pulling both sides would tear the system apart. He decided to work something out with San instead. Yang Chao asked if he planned to beg. Di Jun smiled and said no, he trusted San. Yang Chao asked if he was certain that there were two people you kept close, those who could do the job and those willing to sacrifice for you. Yang Chao smiled and said such people gather naturally when someone shines. That evening, guests filled the hall. Drinks flowed. A wedding couple stood proudly, a massive diamond on the bride's hand. Di Jun watched them, thinking how transactional it all felt. Someone recognized him and shouted that rumors were true. The bride praised Yanan's looks. Di Jun congratulated him. Soon Di Jun was left chatting with the bride. She praised him openly, calling him the envy of everyone. He was lucky not to inherit responsibility and could simply enjoy life. Di Jun smiled awkwardly and said money only mattered if it stayed. She laughed, calling him the chairman's favorite. He joked about receiving only a racing car he couldn't drive. She teased that maybe a bigger gift was coming. Di Jun excused himself and left. Later in the restroom, Kim appeared serious. He said something was wrong. Dajun replied, telling him to wait in his car at the parking lot, and he would be back as quickly as possible. In the parking lot, a man joined them. He introduced himself as Shim, where before Shim replied that they had once met at Yanjin Villa. Then he gave the hero a ride home. Di Jun opened his eyes in surprise as he remembered the beating in the parking lot. Shim said time was short, so he would get straight to the point. He explained that their department was dealing with the third-generation Kim. Looked anxiously toward the back seat. Shim said that about a month ago, they noticed someone had started following everyone from the third generation. Di Jun asked in fear if it was really behind all of them. Shim looked at the hero seriously and said yes, they were not testing the waters, they were simply monitoring his movements. Di Jun then asked if Yanjin was being followed too. He explained they were tracking surveillance on all third-generation heirs. Di Jun realized it wasn't just him. Shim admitted they lacked power and future. Strategy teams never survived long. They needed a roof. Di Jun listened, then calmly said this wasn't loyalty. It was a deal. They worked for him, he paid. Price could be money or a future. Shim agreed without hesitation. Di Jun looked out the window and said if they wanted more, they'd have to earn it. Kim swallowed hard. Di Jun said that starting tomorrow he'd take taxis instead. The tail had to follow carefully, slow enough not to be exposed. Kim answered immediately that he could handle it. Dijun turned to Shim and said that from now on all reports from the strategy team would come to him first. He'd mark anything sensitive in red before it went upstairs. Shim smiled and said he understood. Dijun added that all expenses were covered. If they needed money for anything personal, they could come to him directly. He made it clear they would never have to worry about money again. The room went silent. Dijun closed his eyes and realized how much he'd gained today, and a clearer picture of who to watch. The TV flickered. A Japanese flag appeared. A news anchor reported that fantasy investments funds were allegedly coming from Japan, and that Ain Motors could become a bridge for Japan's auto industry into Korea. San crossed his arms, teeth clenched. He said if anti-Japanese sentiment took hold, they'd be finished. They needed a press conference immediately. Dijun replied calmly that articles like this never appeared without a reason. San remembered the smiling old man and realized Dihan Group was playing dirty. At the press conference, cameras flashed. San stated clearly that the rumors were false. Fantasy had made short-term investments in Japan, taken profits and exited. A journalist asked if the profits stayed in the U.S. San answered that all of it would be reinvested into rebuilding Ain Motors. Another reporter questioned why an investment firm would take on such a risky acquisition. A woman accused them of acting as agents for Japan. San snapped, demanding to know who started the Japan narrative. Behind the cameras, Dijun adjusted his cap. This was exactly the message they needed. Chairman Song stepped forward and confirmed Ain Group's full support. Union leaders stood behind him, promising wage freezes and cooperation until recovery. He declared that there would be no layoffs. The room went quiet. Song said corporations weren't just profit machines. They carried people's livelihoods. He accused Dihan Group of planning mass layoffs under the excuse of restructuring. Reporters scribbled furiously. He knew the key was speed. No time for Dihan to counterattack. Later, the TV showed analysis clips. Global auto wars. Only the top 10 would survive. If Ajin merged with Dihyun, costs would drop, efficiency would soar, and jobs would multiply. The screen went dark. San sighed. The stock price hadn't moved. Public opinion was split cleanly in half. Dijun said that was good. Both sides already accepted Ain would be taken over. San muttered that Chaebol's controlling the media was terrifying. Dijun corrected him quietly. It wasn't fear. The media just knew the taste of money. That night, Dijun offered San a drink. He reminded him he was an adult now. San hesitated until Dijun pulled out an unlimited card. No limit. San stared in horror. Dijun said it was pocket money from Hanson Ilbo's daughter, a matter of face for third-generation heirs. San laughed helplessly and promised to take him somewhere unforgettable. The long corridor was lit by grand chandeliers, drinks, and fruits lined the table. San held a glass goblet, his eyes closed for a moment before he slowly looked away. The man scanned the table, sensing that the main character was hiding some incredible idea. Though he couldn't tell what it was, San smiled calmly and said that truly great people always create ideas out of nothing. Later, Dijun returned home late. His grandfather asked if he drank. Dijun said not much. The old man snapped, asking if he felt like a loser. Dijun answered calmly that the fight wasn't over. His grandfather scolded him for clinging to finished battles and ordered him to analyze his mistakes. Dijun admitted he underestimated Dihan's meticulousness and ruthlessness. The old man warned him that before striking, you must know how strong the enemy's fist is. Dijun said he rushed and missed the timing. He didn't expect them to twist Japanese investment into a weapon. The old man demanded he remember this feeling. Then Dijun said he needed his final card. His grandfather raised an eyebrow. Dijun said Sang Motors could fall at any moment. He explained that announcing a merger between Ain and Sang would flip the board instantly. The old man exploded, accusing him of greed. Dijun replied calmly that being half greedy was pointless. If fingers were going to point anyway, they might as well point fully. Silence followed. The grandfather said mergers united everything into one whole, and Dijun didn't even own Ain yet. Dijun replied that negotiations existed to turn jokes into reality and dreams into contracts. If the scales didn't balance, you added weight. He said he'd put more weight down. The old man listened. Dijun explained the two weapons, Sang's name heavier than Dihan and confidence, fairness, stability. Speculation would vanish overnight. The old man crossed his arms and closed his eyes. Then he said calmly, he still wasn't satisfied. Dijun frowned, thin brows tightening as his fist clenched. He knew he was greedy, but this wasn't greed alone. It was alignment. And right now, he wasn't sure whether his grandfather was testing him or simply refusing to hand over Sang Motors. Keeping his voice calm, Dijun made his move. He told his grandfather to leave all subsidiary shares untouched and put only Sang Motors itself on the scale. If that happened, he promised, he would tip the balance. The old man's eyes widened. Was he suggesting splitting Sang Motors apart? Dijun grinned and calmly listed 8 subsidiaries, including Ain Motors and Sayang Motors. Separate them properly, he said, and a new auto giant would be born. The old man fell silent. Dijun watched his face carefully. That wasn't rejection. That was disappointment, which meant the old man wanted more. So Dijun pressed forward. He said they should immediately announce a full merger between Sang Motors and Ain Motors. The moment the market heard that Sang's subsidiaries were being spun off, Sang's stock would crash. The old man's eyes widened again. Dijun continued smoothly. When the stock hit rock bottom, he would quietly buy it under borrowed names. Interest flickered across the old man's face. Then Dijun added the final layer. After Ain was absorbed and the partial merger completed, the subsidiary split would be cancelled. Sang Group would grow stronger, and Ain Group could later be absorbed entirely. The old man asked sharply if investors wouldn't swarm in, furious over losses. Dijun smiled. When a massive cart moves forward, ants get crushed. If you stop for every ant, the cart never moves. The old man warned that buying shares this way would make Dijun one of Sayang's major shareholders. Dijun asked calmly if that wasn't a gift that came a little too easily. When the stock rebounded, they'd profit tax-free. The old man laughed and called him impudent, said evil already suited him well. Dijun's lips curled. He'd passed. That same night, Yahello sat stiffly as executives gasped in shock. He announced they would take over Ain Group. Someone warned they had no time and not enough money. Yahello lowered his head and said they'd simply hook their leg onto Dihan's leg as it ran. Confusion rippled through the room. He explained calmly, if Fantasy acquired Ain Group, Sang Motors would merge with Ain Motors. That was his role. Eyes widened. Only Sayang Motors would be separated. It would merge with Ain. A new automobile conglomerate would be born, and Tu would become its first CEO. Sweat beaded on Tu's forehead. He pointed out that regardless of merger ratio, Fantasy Investment would still be the main shareholder. Yahello smiled. Fantasy's CEO had already extended his hand. If Tu hesitated now, he'd become a dog chasing a chicken. The chairman added casually that Tu himself once said he wanted to create a new car company and hand it over fully packaged. Someone tried to argue about Fantasy. Yahello cut it off. They were money players. Packaging would be expensive, very expensive. He told Tu to prepare. In another office, Sean raised his hand. He asked what was so difficult about spinning off Sang Motors and merging it with Ain. Dijun grinned. The merger ratio could wait. If his grandfather didn't yield, the owner would change. Sean snapped, asking what that even meant. Dijun smiled coldly. His grandfather never backed down after mixing blood into his plans. He took everything first, then shared crumbs. Sean fell silent. Dijun stood by the window, hands in his pockets. By the time the buyer was confirmed and the merger began, winter would arrive. A brutal one. San Dihan, even the government would be drained. At that point, his grandfather would have no choice. Cameras flashed. Sean announced publicly that Sang Motors would spin off its subsidiaries, merge with Ain Motors, and lead the creation of a specialized automobile corporation. Reporters erupted with questions about fantasy, about leadership, about power. Elsewhere, a remote control smashed against a TV screen. Batteries scattered across the floor. The man stood up, furious, demanding to know how this happened without anyone noticing. No one answered. He barked orders, 2 hours, every contact, every cousin, every civil servant, every bank employee. Use every brain available. Under a clear blue sky, a door slammed open. Yi burst in, saying it was impossible. Yanao didn't look up. He calmly poured tea and told him to sit down. And drink. The man stepped forward, fists clenched, demanding to know if his father was really abandoning the automotive industry. What wasn't enough for him anymore? Yang Qiao calmly sipped his tea and said he regretted nothing. He had reviewed every weakness in the company, stacked them together, and made a decision. Yang Yi exploded. He shouted that his father hadn't said a single word to him, that he learned everything from television, that this was a core subsidiary issue. Was this all he deserved as vice president? Yang Qiao looked up, veins bulging with anger. He said President Tu personally delivered the documents with his written decision. Tu was the one who announced the merger. Must have been entertaining, watching Yang Yi's face when those papers were handed over. Yang Yi accused him of treating him like a rag doll. Yang Qiao set the mug down and coldly asked if he was finished. When Yang Yi didn't understand, Yang Qiao smiled faintly and asked whether the visit was only to vent anger. Yang Yi snapped. Yang Qiao slammed his palm on the table and shouted for him to stop. Silence fell. Then Yang Qiao roared that if Yang Yi was ashamed of his vice president's business card, he could leave. Any man in Korea would kill for that card. All Yang Yi did to earn it was be born as his son. He pointed at him and said bluntly that without his bloodline, Yang Yi wouldn't even qualify as an executive director. Yang Yi's lips trembled, tears filled his eyes, he lowered his head. Yang Qiao finally placed a hand on his shoulder. He said calmly that even if Yang Yi wasn't outstanding, this place was still his. All he had to do was think about Sang Group's future and protect it. Nothing more. The old man exhaled heavily, realizing he was consoling a 40-year-old son at 70. Curious what happens next? Tap that cheeky bell, subscribe, like it.